Hey, so I want to talk about the PyeongChang Olympics, which are the 23rd Winter Olympiad and the second Olympic event to be held in South Korea. 30 years, of course, 30, excuse me, 30 years, of course. Why can I not get my words out today? 30 years ago, of course, Seoul held the Summer Olympics, which is usually a bigger event. The Summer Olympics generally involve more athletes and more nations. Nevertheless, an Olympic Games is an Olympic Games, and for most of Olympic history, the Winter Olympics has been separate from the Summer Olympics. I believe it was around the 20s they divided the two. I might be wrong about that. It might have been a good bit later. Might have been the 70s, actually. I could be wrong about that. But regardless, that means we now have an Olympic event every 2 years as opposed to 4 years. Um, I can't talk much about the opening ceremony, unfortunately, because I did not see it. That was disappointing. I had to be in work, and it's the first opening ceremony I've missed in some time. I saw the opening of Rio de Janeiro. I saw the opening of Sochi. I saw the opening of London, of course. Um, I don't think I saw Vancouver. I think I watched it online, and I remember I wanted to watch the Beijing opening ceremony, but the TV reception at the time was terrible 8 years ago. So this is the first opening ceremony I've missed in about 8 years since Vancouver. So that was disappointing. Hopefully someone will upload it to YouTube. Hopefully the official Olympic channel will do that. Then I can watch the whole thing. I've seen highlights and it looks like it was very creative. I think opening ceremonies are always a opportunity to showcase art and creativity for the world, to showcase the culture of a country. And I have to say, I always enjoy opening ceremonies. I haven't seen one yet that I didn't enjoy, whether it be on the screen or online. I'm very proud of our Olympic opening ceremony directed by Danny Boyle, but I've seen others around the world, and I can't say that any of them were terrible. I think they all had positive, enjoyable, creative aspects, and I think that's a very good thing. I know some people get cynical about this and they say it's all a big PR stunt, but in a world that has so many problems, we need some positivity. So I think an Olympic opening ceremony is just that. That doesn't, of course, mean that Olympic Games are apolitical. Quite the opposite is true. And there is a little bit of irony in the constant mantra of the Olympic Committee saying it's just about sport. Because realistically, I think most people know that there is not a single Olympic Games that doesn't have some controversy, some more so than others. Or if not controversy, some sort of background. Now, with this one, it's obviously the tensions between the two Koreas, or perhaps more accurately, tensions on the Korean Peninsula, Northeast Asia, because um, from what I understand, the rhetoric from the North is being treated in the South with caution but not surprise. The last year has been arguably the most tense time since the peak of the Cold War. I mean, the so-called doomsday clock, this scenario whereby the world is pushing towards outright annihilation or outright Armageddon, whatever way you want to look at it, is now the closest it's been since, I believe, the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's no small thing. And it's a combination of factors, chaos in the Middle East. Well, that's hardly anything new, but the tensions in Northeast Asia are particularly severe right now. I mean, they're always tense, but the last sort of year and a half, it's been a combination of different things. On one hand, you have the tensions on the Korean Peninsula, a very belligerent North. You have a president in the White House who's using very different rhetoric from his predecessors and who's ratcheting up the temperature as well. You have joint US, South Korean, Filipino military exercises. You have an assertive China that's also throwing its weight around. Um, you have ever growing nationalistic tensions between China and its neighbors. All these things combined are creating a potentially very volatile situation. I don't think any country, even North Korea, would be insane enough to start a war tomorrow. But I don't think anyone could be complacent about how serious the situation is. Um, so there will be some who say this is all a big stunt by the North, i.e., by sending, if you like, a goodwill gesture in the shape of this ensemble. And there was a lot of coverage of Kim Jong-un's sister, his younger sister Kim Yo-jong, attending. Apparently, in the last few hours, there's been breaking news that she has invited Moon Jae-in, um, the South Korean president, to Pyongyang for talks. Now, I don't know when was the last time a South Korean president was in the North, but I'd imagine it's been some time. Um, Indeed, this Olympic Games, and I suppose you could argue this with any world leader, but it's become a bit of a personal test for President Moon. He's taken quite a conciliatory tone to the North, or at least he's seen in Korean politics as left wing. And it seems to me he's trying to copy the or replicate the sunshine policy of um, Kim Dae-jung. I think I'm getting that name right. The who was known as the Mandela of Eastern Asia. Kim Dae-jung was a widely respected figure. He won the Nobel Peace Prize, um, and he's highly admired among South Koreans, as far as I know, because of his efforts for peace in the region. But I think that South Koreans would have very mixed feelings about President Moon's approach. Some will no doubt be cynical. I mean, with every Olympic Games, there's always domestic cynicism. In the case of Brazil, people were angry. They thought the money was being wasted. There was huge protests against Dilma Rousseff. Of course, she was facing corruption probes at the time. In Britain, there were controversies, probably less than they were in Brazil, but nevertheless, we also had controversies about the cost, about how the Olympic Stadium would be used. In Beijing, of course, there were enormous controversies outside the country as well, with the unrest going on in Tibet at the time, and then of course Russia invaded Georgia, probably not by coincidence on the very same day as the opening ceremony. So the Olympics have always had a backdrop. Um, I'm thinking also with the Cold War, you had the 1980 Moscow Games were boycotted by the US because of the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. Then, of course, the Eastern Bloc countries reciprocated by boycotting the Los Angeles Games of '84. Um, so there will be a lot of commentary about this kind of mutual presentation by North and South. Apparently, for example, they held. I don't know. I can't comment about the presentation or the ceremony in detail because I didn't see it. But from what I gather, I think they brought up the torch together, and there was a piece towards the end where Imagine was performed. John Lennon's Imagine. It's a nice song. Well, it's a great song, and it's a very nice gesture. But I think anyone honestly looking at the situation knows full well that these games are not going to change tensions in the region. I don't want to dampen on the parade. I think it's a nice gesture, but with the volatile nature of the North, it would be difficult to not have some cynicism and think, well, is this just a PR stunt? Apparently, for example, the opening ceremony wasn't even broadcast in the North, which isn't surprising. It's a very secretive state, and there's long been a tendency for its leaders to be, um, I'm saying leaders in plural, I should say the Kim dynasty, because it's unlike other totalitarian regimes in that it's very much dynastic. Um, that's where it is very different from China. I mean, in China, Xi Jinping has no personal relation from Hu Jintao. Hu Jintao has no personal family relationship with Jiang Zemin and so on. That's where North Korea is almost unique um, as totalitarian regimes go. We think of the Duvaliers in Cuba, but there aren't many other examples where we have such an effective dynastic totalitarian communist state in that way. Um, Thomas Bach, the IOC president, lauded the joint march of the two Koreas as a powerful message. He said, "We are all touched by this wonderful gesture. We all join and support you in your message of peace." Um, Mike Pence, Vice President Pence, was representing the US contingent, or he was representing the US, and he was sitting only meters away from Miss Yo-jong. So, I don't know if that was deliberate or apparently Washington's insisted that he had no communication with her. Um, so I don't know. I mean, on a practical note, politics aside, apparently this is one of the coldest games ever, um, which sounds almost like an oxymoron. You'd think, I would have thought a Winter Olympics is supposed to be cold, but apparently there is such a thing as it being too cold that I guess it interferes with equipment and so on. Like I say, it's a smaller overall event than Summer Games. Nevertheless, there are 2,900 athletes involved, and some surprising nations: Ghana, Eritrea. These are not countries you would usually associate with winter sports. Tonga. Apparently, there was a topless Tongan representative. Now, that's the last country on earth I would associate with the Winter Olympics. So whether it's just that people in these countries are experimenting with sports that are associated with the Olympics, I don't know. Another big backdrop to all of this, apart from the tensions in the Korean Peninsula, is Russia. Russia, of course, has the entire nation has been banned from participating. However, Russian athletes, as I understand, can still compete under the Olympic flag, and indeed there are some Russian athletes there. And apparently, it's almost like astronauts and cosmonauts working on the International Space Station. Um, Apparently, Western athletes and Russian athletes on a personal basis have friendships. I will say that whilst I've no sympathy for the Russian state, because I think I agree with the international findings. I think there's simply too much evidence going against Moscow. On the other hand, I do sympathise with individual Russian athletes who maybe are clean and have kind of been tarnished with the same brush. It's a bit like athletes who, let's say, train for the 1980 Olympics in Moscow, American or British athletes, and well, American athletes, because British athletes did go to that one, but then they couldn't go because of the political situation, or for that matter, Soviet athletes who trained for Los Angeles and couldn't go because of the reciprocal boycott. Um, so Russian athletes who are clean apparently can compete under the Olympic flag. It's good that that option is there because I think it would be unfair to penalise them and it would probably destroy the Olympic spirits. But I will say, anyone who thinks the Olympics is ever going to be politics free is naive. So yeah, I'll leave it there. There's not much more to say about the ceremony. Like I said, I didn't see it, but I'm sure it was impressive. I'm sure Korean culture is well respected for its creativity and its artistic merit. So I'm looking forward to seeing that, whether it be on YouTube or whether there's a replay on TV. 35,000 people were in attendance, and they braved the freezing conditions. So for Team GB, Lizzie Arnold, who's our reigning skeleton champion, she was a flag bearer. Team GB has always done well in the Olympics. We are a sporting superpower, I'm pleased to say, and I suspect it will be the same in these games. Um, I'm sure there's many more things to say, but I'll leave it there for now. So, what do you think? Do you think the North Korean um, gestures are pure PR, or do you think they might just be sincere? I don't know. My own feeling is the track record of the North is one of great instability. In terms of the American approach, it looks like there's a division between Washington and Seoul in terms of how to approach the North. Seoul is taking a more reciprocal approach at this point. Washington's being a lot more hesitant. So the question is President Moon, being a Korean Neville Chamberlain, is he being very, very naive? Or maybe he is a great peacemaker, and maybe history will judge him very well for all of this. I suspect it will lose some support domestically. I suspect there will be some South Koreans who are angry and who are thinking he's giving in to the North. I don't know. South Korean president has to be one of the toughest jobs in the world because you're trying to get a fine balance between having strong relations with traditional allies like the United States, whilst also having to live with a neighbor like North Korea. So it's not an easy thing. Um, and of course, Tokyo and Beijing are going to be watching very closely as well. As I imagine, so will Canberra. Australia is also quite an important player in the region. So further to the south, but it is a Pacific power. So we'll see how things transpire. But definitely the backdrop to this Winter Olympics is all the tensions we've seen on the Korean Peninsula. This might just be a brief thaw, and then we'll go straight back to. I mean, the very day, this happened, the North was having a military parade, so you'd be forgiven for being cynical to some extent. Let me know your thoughts.